Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Downtown Now. This is our first episode of Downtown Now of the new year. We would like to remind you to please feel free to use the chat features during the presentation and ask questions in the Q&A, and we will answer them later. Now, I will turn it over to our Executive Vice President, Business Development, Michael Goldberg.
Thank you, Lauren, and thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon. Welcome back to the Downtown Now webinar series. We kicked off this series last year and did 28 episodes altogether, but this is our first episode of 2021, so we appreciate you for joining us today. For those of you who are new to the webinar and may not be familiar with Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Downtown Cleveland Alliance is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to building the most compelling place to live, work, and play in downtown Cleveland. And as I said, we mentioned that we created this webinar series last year at the beginning of the pandemic, really as a way to update the downtown community on what the Alliance is up to and what is happening in downtown Cleveland. And as the year progressed, to really try to stay in front of some of the trends and make plans to help downtown weather the pandemic and come out stronger on the other side. Today, we have with us Michael Goldberg to talk about an industry that is intrinsically valuable to downtown Cleveland's economy, and that's the entrepreneurism and startup industry that is so important to any downtown in any city. Michael is the Associate Professor of Design and Innovation at Case Western Reserve University, Weatherhead School of Management. He's also the Executive Director of the Veal Institute for Entrepreneurship. Michael, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Michael.
Well, I want to get right into talking about something that's top of mind for everybody. There's a big announcement in Cleveland just a week or so ago. Governor DeWine and a group of economic development partners in Cleveland, including Case Western Reserve, announced the Cleveland Innovation District. And I think everybody watching is probably aware, this is part of a $500 million investment in Cleveland, with the promise of creating up to 20,000 jobs over the next 10 years. And a lot of that job creation, I think, is wedded to hopes that we're going to see higher levels of entrepreneurism, more startup activity, more commercialization of technologies that are being developed in Cleveland. Tell us a little bit about the Cleveland Innovation District and Case's involvement, and what your take is on what we can expect in terms of the impact on entrepreneurial activity in Cleveland.
Sure. Yeah, it was an exciting announcement. So it's a little over 2 weeks ago. The governor, the lieutenant governor, all the heads of the 5 institutions that are partners here alongside Jobs Ohio spoke in addition to Mayor Jackson. The Jobs Ohio had partnered in Cincinnati with the University of Cincinnati and Cincinnati Children's around an innovation district there. And starting this summer, the 5 institutions, the 3 leading hospitals, Cleveland Clinic, University Hospitals, Metro Health, and us in Cleveland State, got together to sort of talk about ways to collaborate with Jobs Ohio on this innovation district opportunity. I think what we found, as challenging as the pandemic has been for everyone, including entrepreneurs and small businesses, the healthcare systems in particular, alongside the university partners like us in Cleveland State, have been working really seamlessly and connectedly during the pandemic. So there was already all sorts of cooperation and collaboration that was happening. So the discussions that we had across the institutions and with Jobs Ohio is about ways that we can work together. The centerpiece of the Cleveland Clinic's participation in this as a new center for pathogen research and around infectious disease. This is an area in which Case Western Reserve is deeply involved, University Hospitals is deeply involved. So there was a lot of enthusiasm among the institutions around that area. The area in which we will be leading an institute around is around next generation health. We've got some really exciting things happening on our campus related to AI in medicine and in imaging and augmented reality and virtual reality and a lot of things happening kind of as we try to continue to kind of supercharge our commercialization efforts out of our lab. So we're thrilled to be partnering with the other institutions and with Jobs Ohio bring more resources to bear. I was on a small group. There were 5 reps from each of the committees, so it was fun working with my counterparts at the other institutions. And in some ways, like the announcement gets you to the start of the work. I think many folks on this call are also probably deeply or familiar, or at least heard of it, with a lot of the exciting work that's happening in Midtown, with the Cleveland Foundation's announcement of their headquarters and Jumpstart moving there, and the Cleveland Innovation Project, which is a partnership between the Cleveland Foundation, Greater Cleveland Partnership, the Fund for Economic Future, Jumpstart, and Team NEO, which is also working with the business community and the institutions around some of these same areas to help bolster translation and commercialization, among other things, in the community. So that project and the work that's being done in Midtown, and the announcement around with Wexford developing sort of real estate in the area, combined with the enthusiasm around this new Jobs Ohio Innovation District partnership, the timing's great. So we're excited about them. That there's a lot of dots to still be connected and coming together around both of the projects. But it's been a fun project to work on, and now like the real work begins.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about how that real work might begin, and some of the ways we might connect the dots here in Cleveland. You write a lot about entrepreneurship, and you have experiences around the country and around the world. As you step back and look at some of the places that have done commercialization of technologies coming out of projects like the Cleveland Innovation District, what can we in Cleveland learn from some of those things that you've seen and observed in other places?
Sure. I mean, interestingly, and I can tell a brief story of how I got involved with this, the world has been interested in what we're doing in Cleveland. And I think our story, and I think a number of folks that are probably involved through DCA and all the various pieces, like our state government in particular, through a program that was started under Bob Taft called the Ohio Third Frontier, has been really a model program, not only in the country, but around the world. As it's put over $2 billion of resources to work against entrepreneurship, including things like commercialization and access to capital. Our philanthropic community, again, for folks that are involved in the Downtown Cleveland Alliance and others, like we've got leading foundations that for a number of years have supported economic development and the formation of nonprofit organizations such as Jumpstart, which are key in delivering some of the programs, and in the case of Jumpstart, actual funding to companies. So this mix of philanthropy, engaged philanthropy, government, and in Ohio's case, and even Cleveland's case, it's really been primarily driven by the Third Frontier program over the past few years, and then the private sector coming together. So I had the opportunity to do a Fulbright fellowship in Vietnam in 2012, and ended up sort of doing it. Actually, it wasn't a course at the time, but it was like a seminar series where I was Skyping with folks back in Cleveland to sort of share their story. They had actually asked if I could do something on Silicon Valley, because that's where everybody wants to be, the next Silicon Valley. I was like, actually, you guys look a lot more like Cleveland. And that then led to a creation of a course on Coursera, which is one of the leading sort of online sort of platforms tied to higher ed. So we created a class called Beyond Silicon Valley, which used sort of a case study of some of the things we've done in Cleveland. And that's led to a lot of travel and a lot of discussion. So it's been, I just finished this past last week an engagement where we had a group of students from a country now called North Macedonia, a small former Yugoslav republic, and Cleveland, and we were exchanging ideas. So what started as like almost a visceral reaction to like, oh, you don't want to learn about Silicon Valley, you should learn about Cleveland, has sort of led to I guess the last 6 years of like a book now, kind of a lot of conversations. And hey, frankly, we're still learning here in Cleveland, even some of the things that we talked about relative to the Innovation District and Cleveland Innovation Project, we're still learning from others. So by no means are we, we're a model in that I think And some of this, I think, is just being Clevelanders. Like we don't have the egos, no offense to our friends in Silicon Valley, but like, I think we approach it of like, hey, here's what we're trying to do. It's a work in progress. And actually that openness, I think, has resonated with other folks and communities around the world. So we've had some interesting dialogues and engagement as we sort of learn from one another.
Well, I'd like to take that a step further, because in talking about your observations of Silicon Valley, you've actually written a book about all of this beyond Silicon Valley, growing entrepreneurship and transitioning economies. And in Cleveland, from time to time we'll talk about being the next Silicon Valley. As you look at what made Silicon Valley work, and you look at cities like Cleveland, what are some of the opportunities that you see for cities like Cleveland to, both replicate some of the success that happened in Silicon Valley, and maybe to learn from some of the things that didn't work out as well there?
Sure. I mean, we started with a discussion around the 5 anchor institutions, or 5 of the anchor institutions in town in this Jobs Ohio partnership. I mean, I think a key piece of the Silicon Valley story is the role of research universities and research labs, and helping create. I mean, you need, and our university, Case Western Reserve, has $400 million a year in sponsored, primarily federal government research. So you need strong research institutions. We have a number of them in walking distance of me, particularly at Cleveland Clinic and University Hospital. So you have some really awesome research that is also been at the core of Silicon Valley. How do you sort of, leverage the Stanfords and the Berkeleys and the other labs to eventually create companies? I think some of it's around culture. And I think some of the things that you guys are doing at the Downtown Cleveland Alliance, and just folks down, making, a livable, walkable, attractive place for talent. I mean, it's no secret that, we've lost, actually I was talking about this in class today. I mean, I gave an example of 3, I put up a slide, there were 3 faces on the slide, and I asked the students, like, what do these 3 people have in common? And the 3 faces were John Cobbs, who's a native of Medina, who went to Case Western Reserve, Hallie Tecco, who went from Solon, who went to Case Western Reserve, and Matthew Stepka, who went to Ignatius, went to Case Western Reserve. All of them moved to San Francisco. John and Hallie both started companies. Matthew went to Google. They were here. They were Clevelanders. They came to Case and they left. And so as we think as a community about retaining talent, and obviously this is an interesting moment, because we're doing it right now with remote work and distributed workforces, where this may be, and you're starting to, we're seeing it anecdotally. I mean, perhaps the residential market, even in downtown Cleveland, and certainly in the suburbs, are seeing people that came from New York or San Francisco or other places. One of the things when we think about Silicon Valley and around company creation, because we now are seeing folks, and I have a friend who's a Case grad who moved back to the area from San Francisco, where he was at Adobe to work for a company called Automatic originally, that has a distributed workforce, which means there is no headquarters. So he was, with his initial, young child, and they had another one, he could do it from Solon. I think that poses some really interesting opportunities for the region and for downtown, as we think about talent coming here and retaining talent, and kind of what is the future work, and will this talent simply just be remote workers, or are they going to actually create companies, which is a really important distinction.
Well, I'm curious about your perspective on that from your study of entrepreneurism. Before the pandemic, one of the things that we're big proponents of place here in downtown Cleveland, proponents of place-based work culture. We're proponents of a walkable place to live, work, and play. And coming into the pandemic, we were big believers, and a lot of economic developers were big believers in the synchronicity that comes from creative people being clustered together in the same place, and those serendipitous interactions that lead to new ideas and can lead to company creation and startups and foster a culture of entrepreneurism. That dynamic isn't happening right now. Things like this or virtual meetings are happening right now. What do you think that means for the future of entrepreneurism? If can we have the same type of innovation and collaboration over these sorts of interactions, or does there really need to be a return to people being able to cluster together and have those creative interactions that are a little bit more spontaneous?
That's a great question. Folks on this call may be familiar. A couple of years ago, there was a City Club event featuring Chris Hively from Techstars. So a number of folks in the community, including Charlie Stack at Flash Starts and others, brought Techstars, which is actually an internationally known accelerator, originally started in Boulder, which is a community that also wasn't necessarily known for a strong entrepreneurship community, but has done really quite well. And Chris, in his assessment of Cleveland, and obviously this is pre-pandemic, actually said that we were weak on, relative to others, on kind of that density of like the places where people are coming together. And even since that was that study was released, I mean, actually right now I'm at in my office at Weatherhead, and I am teaching classes on campus. I started this week, but our Veal Institute office is in ThinkBox, and so ThinkBox, which a big part of what we're trying to do, and we look forward to continuing to do it again, is sort of have, and ThinkBox is a 50,000 foot makerspace. Many folks on this call are hopefully familiar with it. If you're not, please come when we reopen again. Lots of cool opportunities to tinker and prototype. And but the top two floors, there's hotel offices and incubation space. So that idea of density and sort of being together, accelerator, some of the co-working spaces like Limelight and that have sort of even popped up sort of fairly recently. What Digital C is doing with Tech Hive in Midtown. I mean, these are all places where events can take place, people can come together. And I think coming out of this period, I mean, as efficient in some ways as this all is, like, people are going to want to get back together and be together. And I think those coffee room conversations that happen in between meetings or after a meeting, I mean, we're missing that. I mean, I don't know, but I'm sure, I don't know what your schedule looks like, but I'm just going like Zoom to Zoom to Zoom. I don't think that's very healthy. It's hard to eat and go to the bathroom also when you do that all day long. But, I think we're missing like that at the end of the meeting. Hey, Michael, let me, just want to talk to you about something, or we see each other, or we make small talk about the Browns. I mean, so I think something that's missing. And so when we're all able to get back together again, I think we're going to want to, which again, I think speaks well for efforts, for a vibrant downtown. I mean, obviously the challenge that we're all facing, and I know you and many of your members are facing, is like just the damage that's being done to small business, to restaurants. I mean, we might normally be doing this over a catered lunch, from one of the great restaurants in Cleveland, but now we're not using that budget. So I am hopeful that once we get through this and we can all safely get together, people are going to want to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that, one of the issues that we talk to a lot of businesses across a lot of industry sectors, and, they're trying to assess what the future of work is going to look like. How much of it is going to be done remotely, how much more people are going to be able to do from home. And, as you've alluded to, one of the things we encourage them to think about is, what's missing from interactions like this, and the kinds of interactions you've just described that are hard to capture, they're hard to quantify, but what we urge them to think about is they're the kinds of interactions that build your culture, that lead to innovation, that the economy needs, your business needs. And those are challenging conversations to have, and challenging things to encourage even business leaders to think about. So, again, do you see that coming up yet? As you're talking with founders and startups that are in the early stages. Are they encountering those same types of challenges? Are they thinking about those issues as they think about how they're going to grow their companies?
Yeah, there's no doubt that this period and reliance on some of the tools like we're using right now, is here to stay. We've already seen, even with Cleveland-based startups, oh boy, I'm having a senior moment on the company, Toa Technologies, that was acquired by Oracle. Some very innovative Israeli entrepreneurs based here, a very distributed workforce in terms of technical talent, primarily from the Ukraine. This was years ago, and this was before, the world moved to Zoom. So even founders here in the area, it isn't a secret to anyone that's been sort of working in Cleveland and helping think about how Cleveland's economy can grow, has, the talent attraction piece, and it's not just us. Every city is fighting for the bright, often technical talent, but sometimes business talent to kind of lead and drive companies. So it was a tight labor market for those folks before the pandemic, and it hasn't changed. There's certain pieces of the economy that have been obviously severely impacted, but they're in the venture space. It's interesting, like venture capital, putting aside the frothiness of this GameStop and all the excitement around that, but just on venture has been very robust in the last year. So I think that shows that, and obviously the stock market, which doesn't mean that people aren't hurting. As the forward-looking investor sees a lot of promise ahead, so there's a lot of enthusiasm in the venture space, a lot of money going in, and some of these questions that you're asking about the ways that we work and where people will be and where Cleveland fits into this. I do think that it actually is a very opportune moment for our city, because I think many of us, and obviously the downtown core was so much growing, available, awesome housing stock, like it has become a place where young people want to live and work, and that obviously didn't, like, I grew up in Cleveland and left, and like no one lived downtown. Now it's amazing to see kind of young founders and students. So it's exciting. I think, as we pull out of this, it is encouraging to see that, people are still, new projects are sort of being greenlit. There seems to be an optimism that folks are going to want to live and work downtown.
Yeah, no, we're certainly seeing that. It's just a kind of a matter of grinding through what remains of the pandemic. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and go back to your scholarly work. We mentioned the Veal Institute at the outset, and we've talked a little bit about your scholarship. And you've been executive director of the Veal Institute at Case for about a year now. Tell us a little bit about that. What is the Veal Institute, and how does it fit in with the culture of entrepreneurism that we're building in Cleveland?
Sure. No, thanks. What a year it's been. Yes, I took a new role on campus starting in January, as you mentioned, Michael. The Veal Foundation supported the formation of a new institute on campus, and it's interesting. Including many universities, including folks in Northeast Ohio at John Carroll and Cleveland State and Ashland, other places, like the idea of a business or an entrepreneurship institute or center is not new to the region or universities. Actually, it was new for us. So we have entrepreneurship in a number of our schools, including the business school where I am right now, and our School of Engineering and our School of Medicine. But this new institute, which reports in centrally to our provost, which is sort of our central administration, is was sort of set up to kind of help coordinate and catalyze some of the entrepreneurship activity on our campus and with the community. It's very much a work in progress. I mean, the main thing that I've been doing, and actually even events like this where we're connecting out, as we connect to alums and other folks in the community that might want to be startup founders of a piece of technology at our university. So there's some connectivity we do there. There's a lot of programming and courses that we do. So we recruit in guest speakers and adjuncts. I see my friend Paulie Suchi is on the call. Paul runs our Global Entrepreneurship Week in Ohio and just got a new awesome job with Global Entrepreneurship Network nationally. So Paul's somebody that does a lot of connecting. So a lot of what I do is kind of external facing, connecting with others. You know, I worked in tech. I worked at AOL. Of course, my students have never heard of it for 5 years back in the day. And I've done a lot of different things, kind of in venture capital and tech. And so I have networks kind of outside of Cleveland. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is just kind of connect the dots between our really awesome alumni network, some things that are happening, student entrepreneurs. Actually, we have a pitch competition tonight, our Morgan Taylor Pavey startup competition. Finalists are tonight, of course, via Zoom. They're all welcome. So there's a lot of things that we're doing, and it's really a lot of dot connecting into an environment where a lot of things existed, and we're just trying to kind of help catalyze and support.
We've talked a couple times about connecting dots and culture, and again, I'd like to draw upon some of your insights from your scholarly work, from your travels and your previous experiences. You know, we're sometimes I think criticized from the outside, and we critique ourselves in Cleveland about, you know, not having a sufficiently entrepreneurial culture. I'm curious about your perspective on that, and you know how cities and communities go about building a stronger culture of entrepreneurism.
I mean, I think it's really very much linked to talent. I mean, getting folks, and I'll pick on Paulie because I know he's on the call, you know, like these young, you know, folks returning to the region who have done things in other places, who want to be here, who want to share, who want to start their next thing here. I mean, it's a bit cliche, kind of this embracing failure, but you need to do that. I mean, in Silicon Valley, it really is a badge. Like, you know, if you know, they have F-up parties, you know, I mean, people celebrate founders that have made mistakes. I mean, I think we're getting better. We're not quite there culturally yet. You know, I mean, and I think another piece of this is just like founders and investors making money on investments and companies. So, you know, when Cover My Meds, you know, was sold to McKesson for over $1 billion, you know, local company, Jumpstart was an investor, founders. I mean, people making money and then doing their next thing here. One of our alums, Charu Ramanathan from Cardio Insight, sold to Medtronic for just under $100 million. You know, Charu stayed in the region. She's got a new startup and doing some other really interesting work in social entrepreneurship. So if people make money, both investors and founders, that may be the most important thing. So I think we need to show success, and job creation, you know, is a metric that government and philanthropy cares about. Obviously, even the announcement around the innovation district, I mean, a lot of it's around jobs, and jobs are critically important. That's a piece of the puzzle. You know, folks, founders and investors making money on investments, that's another important piece.
I want to pause and invite the audience, please, if you're watching on Zoom, share your questions via the chat, and we pause here and check in with Lauren and see if we have any questions coming in from the audience.
Sure do. Getting the first one. What are some of the contributing factors that make a place risk averse, and what factors make a place risk accepting?
No, thank you for the question. I do think it's having, from an experience point of view, folks that have taken chances, and then are willing to share. I mean, it's interesting, being with my professor hat, like having courses, and I think that honest dialogue from entrepreneurs. I mean, one thing I find about entrepreneurs, almost all entrepreneurs, like are really willing to share, and oftentimes like sharing stuff that's like not great news, So, I mean, on one hand, entrepreneurs are always pitching, so there's a certain marketing piece to it. But I do believe, and I've seen this in Cleveland as well, I feel like that a lot of our entrepreneurs really do want to kind of share their experience and where where they've gotten screwed over by an investor, or, and for those that are, invest in early stage companies, we call it cap table. I mean, it represents kind of where ownership is. I mean, I had Laura Bennett, who's an awesome entrepreneur, started a company called Embrace Pet Insurance, now is working for Chubb. Like, she shared, like, sharing a cap table with a group of students and kind of where you are on it is like the most revealing. I mean, because it's and like in Laura's case, it was a lesson in how additional rounds of investment, what that does to a founder. Like, that is so instructive to students, and it's like I said, it's hard and it's not always good news. So I've really appreciated folks like Laura. Sam Gerace is another local entrepreneur who's now an adjunct at Weatherhead. I think he's actually teaching a class right now, who's former CEO of Veritix. So he's done a bunch of startups. Like, some of these folks are just so good at sharing. So I think that culture, I think, comes from a community of people that share. And I think we have a number of those people here. And again, when we ask them to kind of talk to students, I mean, people are super willing to do that, which is great.
Great. Another question from the audience. What surprises outsiders the most about Cleveland?
Well, the Brown season was quite surprising and nice to share. I think this very connected ecosystem. I mean, hey, the support structures that have been put in place for entrepreneurs don't work for everybody. And, I mean, no doubt there are folks, let's take a Jumpstart. I mean, I think Jumpstart does some really amazing work for entrepreneurs. Jumpstart's not for every entrepreneur. I think we're really blessed with an ecosystem, organizations, foundations, governments that are very focused on supporting entrepreneurs here. And, there's just more this dot connecting never ends. And again, I think it's harder in the Zoom environment, but I think it's a really nurturing, connected place. I mean, everybody is it's a small enough city where everybody's pretty much reachable, yet it's big enough that, like, we don't know everybody. So I think that's a really makes it a nice place for me to come back to.
Great. This is another one from the audience, from Jack. I love if y'all could build on the housing cost discussion. Studies show that Cleveland doesn't have much of a cost advantage versus NYC, DC, or Chicago when transportation costs are added, suggesting that being car-oriented holds us back. One could argue that those cities also offer more amenities and better services, while also plays into the conversation about agglomeration effects, density, and collaboration. How do city services and community of life interact with entrepreneurship?
Well, I can start. Michael, you probably have some perspectives on this as well.
Go first. I'll jump in.
No, Jeff, that's a good question. It's nice to reconnect. Yeah, I mean, hey, for the folks on this call that have sort of lived and worked in other places that have that more, certainly on the transportation side, as you say, that more connectedness. I mean, interestingly, I moved from Washington, DC to here. I actually walk more in my Cleveland life than I did, and I live in Cleveland Heights. I live very close to Case, but we live, for us, the Cleveland Heights sort of Cedar Fairmount neighborhood, which is our not downtown. And I think downtown has some amazing things. So I love being able to sort of walk to things. I mean, I think you make some good points, Jeff, and I'm not sure, Michael, you probably have more insights on some of the kind of comparisons around cost of living. And in general, it felt like when I moved here from DC, just for value of housing, it's been so much more. But Michael, you probably have some insights on this.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the Jeff in asking the question is right. I mean, there's a lot of research out there that shows our relatively high transportation costs oftentimes outweigh our relatively low housing costs. And, for folks who live in the city, or I would say the inner ring, we're not contributing to that. You don't notice it as much about how spread out the region is. But, as we look at downtown, for example, a lot of our workforce that is in downtown comes from outside the city limits and commutes in from the suburbs. And that's different than a lot of peer cities that we compete against and that we compare ourselves to. So yeah, we're all about downtown, that Downtown Cleveland Alliance, but we're also all about city building and place building, and helping the city of Cleveland overall build greater density, more walkable neighborhoods, having more transit access. I think it kind of goes back to that, as Jeff noted, that conversation we had at the beginning about the need to build greater job density, greater population density in Cleveland. And there's a lot of contributing factors to that. There's regional policy. There's how we've approached public transportation, but getting ahead of that and turning the corner on it, I think is important to us as a city and as a region. I think it goes back to that, Michael, your response to a couple of my questions about, what can we do better? How do we build more of a culture of entrepreneurism? A lot of it comes down to talent attraction and having, more walkable neighborhoods like the one you live in, like downtown. That's ultimately going to help the city and the region be more successful, I think.
Next question is from Amy. How will the Cleveland Innovation District resources expand opportunities for Black and Brown entrepreneurs and those seeking career track jobs? And I think this is also regarding women as well.
Great. Good question, Amy. Nice to see you. Amy's daughter, Sarah, by the way, was one of our awesome speakers about social entrepreneurship for my speaker series. So, dueling speaker series, DCA, Veal, it's all good in the Zoom world. Amy, to your question, I'll take the question about the innovation district just more from my perspective at the university rather than across. And I think it's an important one. We, as part of our strategic plan at the university, we're very focused on our neighboring communities in particular. And, it's interesting, ThinkBox is open to the community. We're one of some maker spaces on university campuses around the country are not open to communities, and ours is, which is great, which means we do get folks coming in who need not only help sort of 3D printing or sort of prototyping, but help with their businesses. And, I think, and Amy knows this well, with the sort of, with a strong philanthropic community and a number of organizations, whether it's University Circle Inc. here in University Circle, or Jumpstart, or the work that Digital C is doing. One of the things and it's a little bit of a struggle, it's like I think the last thing we want to do, particularly for some of our urban core, underrepresented minority entrepreneurs that are like maybe tired of being pointed, because oftentimes it's like, what are we going to do at the university for entrepreneurs that are in need, versus just referring them out to Magnet, Jumpstart, UCI. They all have great programs, or Digital C. So I do believe that we have to keep doing a better job of this. We've done a couple things. We had a really interesting, another Zoom forum with on entrepreneurship in the Huff neighborhood. And, I think we heard some very, and particularly from some of the entrepreneurs, like, a catering entrepreneur who was, talking about the challenges of like selling into Case, right, or the Cleveland Clinic. So
Mhm.
I think some of the questions as we think about the innovation district and the individual institutions are, how can we be a customer for, or increase our, and be more of a customer for sort of some of our Black and brown entrepreneurs sort of in the community, because it hasn't been easy to do that. And so I think it's a work in progress, but certainly my hope with these resources is, the community outreach and because we are, certainly the 5 institutions in that district, we're like critical members of neighborhoods. So it's going to be important that we do the right kind of outreach.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's a great example you gave, Michael, of interacting with entrepreneurs and Huff, because one of the things we talk about a lot at DCA is just the need to break out of networking silos, and to make sure that we're connecting talented entrepreneurs across the city with resources, and not just kind of talking to our own echo chamber over and over again. So I think that's a terrific example that you just gave.
Next question. What would you say to an entrepreneur who may be passionate in pursuing their ideas but uncertain about doing so during the pandemic?
You mean one interesting opportunity as it relates to the pandemic, because I'm seeing this with competitions and even accelerator programs. I mean, some of our even Y Combinator, which is kind of let's say it's the marquee accelerator program, things have gone remote. So it used to be for sort of a talented young entrepreneur in Cleveland that was sort of deciding whether to participate in an accelerator program or even some pitch competitions. Like I've been sharing all sorts of different competitions with students here. It could be Rice in Texas or UNC doing something from our own living rooms. You can do things in a way, and some of that may stay, but maybe some of this is temporary. So I certainly would encourage. I'd almost take. And it's hard because it's not the same, but I think this is an interesting time to find, jump into a startup competition and pitch competition or startup weekends, because everything's virtual. And hey, for busy, and I don't know the background of the professional, but sometimes people are doing it as a side hustle. So they have a day job. This is an idea they have on the side. They're not willing to commit to leave their day job to go do this, which I totally understand. So there may be things that are out there in this next, let's call it 6 months, hopefully not that long, but until things are kind of back to in person. So I think this is actually a huge opportunity to, if the person's idea is something that is kind of startup pitchable, but I think that it's a cool time on some levels to pursue some of those opportunities.
Great. What are some things Cleveland gets right in supporting entrepreneurs?
So some of it, I think, is this web of support from government and philanthropy. I think there's also we work really closely with the Burton D. Morgan Foundation out in Hudson that supported a lot of entrepreneurship activity. They've encouraged us, kind of making sure that we have an honest feedback loop about things that are going well and that aren't going well, and learning from each other. Frankly, even as it comes to some of the stuff we're trying to do on campus at Case, somebody else has probably tried it somewhere else. So we, we're getting lots of feedback, not just from our own ecosystem in Northeast Ohio, but, I've talked to people that are running centers all over the country about things that they're doing. And actually, it's an interesting time, I think, for the city. This whole idea of how we jointly partner, we just did an event last week with the University of North Carolina's Entrepreneurship Center. We were featuring a Clevelander, Clevelander in the diaspora friend. Actually, this is a friend of mine I met in South Africa, of all places. We were both there the year that Mandela was elected in 1994, teaching and doing democratization work. He's now at Nike, left Nike to do his own startup, ended up coming back to Nike, but he, still a huge Browns fan. so we've got some partnering during this time with others, continuing, I think, to tap into, Clevelanders out in the diaspora. I mean, as we all know, there's some amazing people that have left, but still, bleed orange and brown on Sundays. And, it's been fun actually in all these emails with like Clevelanders that are out there. I feel like every email sort of starts with like, are you rewatching the Brown Steeler playoff game? Because I am. So that's always sort of a unique time to reconnect with our fellow Browns fans around the country.
Lauren, I want to jump in and pick up on something you mentioned in there, Michael. We've talked a lot about what we can do and maybe do better to support entrepreneurs, but you've mentioned a couple of times, entrepreneurs need investors. And you also mentioned that, venture capital over the course of the last year was being deployed, and it wasn't a bad year for in terms of deploying venture capital. As you look at the environment here in Greater Cleveland, how would you assess the availability of venture capital to startups and entrepreneurs, and how can we do a better job of attracting more venture capital into the city and into the region?
No, it's a good question. And frankly, this is of the areas that I think are going well for us in the entrepreneurship space. Like, access to venture capital is not one of those areas. Early stage partners was really a leader in our community. They formed probably almost 20 years ago, with a hypothesis that there were deals to be done here in Cleveland and Ohio, and, raised a couple funds around that. Mutual capital partners with Bill Traynor and Wayne Wallace have, invested in a number of nice companies and really provided support. It's a pretty, obviously at the later stage, Riverside, Primus, Resilience, we have later stage investors, but there is a gap. The North Coast Angel Fund, now called North Coast Ventures, I think plays a really important role in that earlier stage. But there's a lot of wealth here that invests in other places that aren't here. And that's been a challenge for a long time. So I think there's a continued education process to show folks what the deal opportunities here are. And I think things like TOA Technologies or Cover My Meds or Cardio Insight or Wireless Environment, which is sold to Ring and then Amazon. We have exits here. Mm-hmm. So I think part of it is making sure that local investors get into these deals. But yeah, I would say venture capital as an asset class and the amount of funding for local companies here, it's not a relative strength.
Fair enough. Lauren, do we have additional questions from the audience?
Yes, one more. We'll do Town Cleveland model or entrepreneurship infrastructure after.
Lauren, you were breaking up just for a little bit there. I couldn't hear the question.
Oh, okay. What countries or cities could downtown Cleveland model our entrepreneurship infrastructure after?
That's a good question. Now that I've said that we're a model for others, but we are a work in progress. I think part of it's being realistic about who we are. Pittsburgh, obviously, of course, we can brag this year, but what they've been able to put together there, leveraging University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, things like Innovation Works, which is like our Jumpstart, I think is a really interesting model. And they've also had, I think relatively more success in attracting corporate partners. Uber, Google, for a variety of reasons have set up there. Carnegie Mellon, particularly in the CS space, has been, they made a heavy bet on that and machine learning a long time ago. And I think that's paying off. And even like cities like Nashville, cities like Chattanooga, where my wife is from, have done some really interesting things to support their ecosystems. I think it's just continuing to learn from others. I don't think we have like not necessarily envy of all these places. It's like, what are the things that they're doing that we can continue to sort of learn from and sort of feedback in here? Because everybody's struggling with the same. I mean, talent attraction, access to capital, whether it's venture capital, angel investing, or accelerators. So, I mean, these are not new issues. I mean, it was interesting. I worked at Microsoft when I was in business school, and my old boss from Microsoft took my online class. He lives in Seattle. And he was like, "Oh, I found your class about, growing entrepreneurship beyond Silicon. It was so useful and interesting. We're really struggling in Seattle with all this stuff." And I was like, I don't really think of Seattle as struggling. I mean, I was like, you guys are like the haves. We're the have-nots. But even Seattle, which doesn't seem to really be struggling with attracting and retaining tech talent and companies, according to him, seemed to also, I think there's a lot of folks that are struggling with these questions.
Well, I know we're coming up on our hour, and Michael, you've been very generous with your time. One thing I often like to do with our guests is ask you to look into your crystal ball. And it's so hard for all of us to plan and forward think in this pandemic environment. But I'd like you to look into your crystal ball 2 to 3 years down the road. We'll hopefully be past this. You'll have been leading the Veal Institute for another 2 or 3 years. The Cleveland Innovation District will be well underway. What do you see in terms of the state of entrepreneurism in Cleveland 2 to 3 years down the road for us?
Yeah, my hope is that a lot of these activities, particularly as we come out of the pandemic and start working more closely together. I mean, I think we're going to have to measure some of these things in metrics like follow-on capital raise. So, are these companies that are being birthed finding funding, growing, hiring, things that are important that, fill downtown apartments and restaurants? Are folks making money? I do think, as I said before, kind of, hopefully the number of exits for founders and investors continues to increase. And then I think this feeds itself, like when you can sort of show success for startups, creating good jobs, high paying jobs in a dynamic environment like Cleveland or in downtown Cleveland. I think these things start to feed itself. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful. And I think a lot of the pieces are in place. And as we kind of emerge from Zoom only to really start being together, I'm very hopeful about the future.
Well, that is a good hopeful note to end our time on today. So, Michael, thank you once again for your time this afternoon and all the work that you're doing to make our city even better and even stronger. Lauren, thank you for your help today in putting together the production. And thank you to everybody in the audience for tuning in. This is our first Downtown Now webinar episode of 2021. We are going to be back on February 25th, I believe, at 3:00. We're going to have a special session kind of in recognition of Black History Month. We're going to be looking at Cleveland's historical ties to movements among Black athletes for social justice. And we'll be talking to representatives from some of our sports teams about how that history is being reflected and manifested today. So I hope you'll be able to join us in a few weeks for that episode. In the meantime, thank you once again for joining us, and I hope to see you around downtown Cleveland. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.